Well, my name is Frans. I have to say, I haven't had as many people comment about what I'm wearing as I have had today. Many people feel like they've gone through the looking glass. They're like, Frans, we didn't even know you had wingtips. What are you wearing? My wife said I'm not allowed to preach in shorts. She said I had to dress properly. So I'm here, grateful to be with you. Oh. Hey! You see, I'm not used to dressing like this. Incredibly uncomfortable. Walking around like this, and I'm like, My wife's like, but it looks good. I'm like, okay. Take your word for it. I was so grateful when Matt asked me to preach, and we're going through the Sermon on the Mount. I have to say, when we started this series, I was sitting right over there, and Matt was kicking us off, and he decided to preach from Matthew 5, verse 1 through 16. And I remember sitting there, I'm like, how on earth are you going to do that? That'd take me a week. Just so much content to go through. And so when they decided, they asked me to preach, and I was like, okay, fine, as long as it passed August 15th, I can do it. And they're like, well, here you go. You can have Matthew 7, verse 1 through 6. I'm like, oh, thank you. The one about judging people. Wonderful. Thanks for giving me the easy one. Before we begin, can we go to the picture of my family? There it is. There's my family. It's my wife. It's my 2 kids. And as a preacher I once heard said, everything else is propaganda. Ultimately, I am what I am as a father, as a husband, and nothing else really matters. And she's the one who you guys should be thanking that I can stand here. The reality is, I am not able to do what I do if she did not bear the hardest part of looking after the kids while I read book after book after book after book after book. And so I'm so grateful to be standing here. Couple of things. Ian asked me, when he asked me to preach, he said, okay, we're giving you a short piece, but we want you to speak a little bit about the sermon as a whole. So I'm going to start with that, then we'll get to our text. But first, a bit of formatter. I want us to think just for a moment is, what is it that we are doing here today? What am I trying to achieve by standing here on this stage and preaching? Because preaching and teaching are not the same thing. If we were in a teaching context at a university, I would expect every person have your notebook out and taking notes, and we would be going deep into this Greek word and the context about this, because the purpose of teaching is primarily the transfer of knowledge. Preaching is not about the transfer of knowledge, even though knowledge is a part of it. Timothy Keller writes, he says that preaching is not about the transfer of information, but preaching is about worship. And what I'm trying to achieve here this morning is not to give you a whole bunch of things to write down and to be like, oh, Frans, really clever. Oh, that's really interesting. I'm trying to give you a word from the Lord to provoke you to worship. So when we get to the end of this, and I'm going to land the plane early, I'm going to leave ample space for this, because the reality is that what you guys need, I can't give you. No matter how smart I am, no matter who the person is that comes up here, the guy up here doesn't have what you need. The only person who can bring life into your dead body is Jesus. And the purpose of the sermon is to lift your gaze and to engage with him. That's where we're going. I want you to be aware, and I want you to be fully engaged when we get there, because the measure to which you engage with that moment is the measure to which you can attain transformation. So let's talk about the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, just a little bit. Talk a little bit about the history of interpretation. For the first 5 centuries or so, the Sermon on the Mount, the churches believed, was the sign, was the encapsulation of what it meant to be a Christian. John Chrysostom in the 5th century writes, he said that we know people who have lived in this way. Therefore, we cannot say that it is impossible. In the 12th century, Thomas Aquinas, however, starts to make a distinction. And Aquinas distinguishes between counsels and precepts. He says that precepts are things that all Christians should follow. So everyone must believe in Jesus as the Son of God. Everybody must believe in the Trinity. Everybody must believe in the Apostles' Creed or in the Nicene Creed. This is non-negotiable things. But Aquinas distinguishes these from counsels, which he says, these are guides for those who want true holiness. These are guides for the serious Christians. Martin Luther builds on Aquinas during the Reformation, and he says, surely it is impossible for us to obey the Sermon on the Mount. And he develops what Reformed theologians have called the third use of the law. He said that the law's only value, the Sermon on the Mount's only value, is to show you that you need Jesus. And in the process, they decapitate the entire sermon, because now it's completely meaningless. If you think about how the sermon ends, Jesus says that the one who hears these words of mine and does them is the one who's building on the rock. So if somebody comes and says to you, well, the reality is you can't do that. Well, guess what? If you don't, you're building on sand. And I want to remind you that it's not Matthew speaking, this is Jesus. Matthew is simply recording the sermon. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this about the sermon. He says, humanly speaking, we could understand and interpret the Sermon on the Mount in 1,000 different ways. I'm a theologian by trade. There are 1,000 interpretations, 1,000 contexts, 1,000 things. Oh, but this word is this word, and oh, it's all very confusing, and therefore nobody knows what's going on. Bonhoeffer says, Jesus knows only one possibility: simple surrender and obedience. The key is not leaving here with a new interpretation or application of the sermon. The key is leaving here with the reality that you and I have to obey this sermon. It's not enough to tell someone, oh, I'll tell you what the passage on judging means in Matthew 7. What you need to walk away with is to stop judging people. Christians love to talk. Everybody's talking on Instagram, on Facebook, and we're like, oh yes, I know everything. Talk. Podcasts, right? Podcasts are now 4 hours long. Talk. And it's just like, man, just shut up. But everybody's talking, and nobody's doing. And then you wonder why the world looks at us like, oh, of no consequence. Because they don't need another person to tell them what they are doing wrong and what they should be doing. They need somebody to show them what God is really like.
Amen. That's good.
Fundamentally, is the question that we need to be asking is, do we really believe that the words of Jesus, the gospel, encapsulated in the Sermon on the Mount, is good news? Do we really believe that if we live in the way that Jesus says we should live in the sermon, that that is the path that leads to life?
Right.
Because if we really believed that blessing those who curse me is the path to life, guess what? We'd be doing it. But unfortunately, is we believe in our heads. We say we believe Jesus, but we deny him by the way we live. So what is the sermon? The sermon is not a checklist about everything that you need to do tomorrow. And then you get to the end of the day, like, okay, I did all 14 things of them. It's so wonderful. I'm very smart. Stanley Hauerwas says this about the sermon. The sermon is not a list of requirements, but it is a description of the life of a people gathered by and around Jesus. The sermon is not a list of things that I or you need to do. It is simply describing what a person looks like when he has decided to follow Jesus. We are people who make peace, not because Jesus told us to make peace and be peacemakers. We are people who forgive those who have sinned against us in egregious ways, not because Jesus said, you got to forgive. I forgive those who have sinned against me because it is in the nature of the God whom I serve to do so. It is in the nature of my God to make peace, to mourn with those who mourn, to bless those who curse, to lay down his life for the many. That is why I do these things. Because it is in the nature of my God to do them. Hope it's I think the third to last slide by Richard Lisher. I'm skipping ahead. Richard Lisher writes this, he says, our only hope of living as the community of the sermon is to acknowledge that we do not retaliate, we do not hate, curse, lust, divorce, swear, brag, preen, worry, or backbite, because it is not in the nature of our God or our destination as a people that we should do these things. The Sermon on the Mount is describing a way of life for those who have gathered around the name of Jesus. We love to tell everybody what they're doing wrong. We love to tell the world that they're sinning. Well, guess what? They're sinners. That's what they do. Stop being amazed by the fact that non-Christians sin. It's what they do. Perfectly normal. The key to getting them to stop doing that is not by telling them, sinner, bad, evil, hell. It's by laying down your life for them so that they may see the forgiveness of God through you. Everyone wants to tell people, oh, you need to stop doing that. Oh, you need to be a Christian. You need to do this. You need to do that. But nobody wants to love them. Nobody wants to walk with them in patience, kindness, long-suffering. Nobody wants to forgive a debt. Because, no, you owe me. But the reality is that until we become a people who embody the nature of our God, this world will not be transformed. And so the measure of maturity is not how many things I do right today or tomorrow. The measure of maturity is, am I becoming a person who embodies the nature of God? Am I becoming a person who is love? Not a person who loves ever so often. Because you can love people and not be a person of love. one more comment about the sermon. Is in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is not in opposition, that is against, the Old Testament. Jesus is also not taking the Old Testament to its true meaning. Let me explain my point. When Jesus speaks about fasting, anybody ever read Isaiah 58? Where it says, "And this is the fast I choose, to clothe your neighbor, to feed the hungry." It's not just about stopping to eat so people see that you're hungry. When Jesus speaks against anger in Matthew 5, verse 21, he gets that from Leviticus 19, which says that you're not allowed to hate your neighbor from your heart. I am the Lord. The Old Testament and the New Testament also are not to be distinguished that the Old Testament is external in my head and the New Testament is internal in my heart. Deuteronomy 6 in the Shema, the very central text of all of Judaism, right in the middle of it in verse 6, it says, "And this law will be on your heart." There is an internalization assumed within the Old Testament covenant, and it is a lack of internalization of the law that led to exile. Not the fact that the law was bad. And so this brings us to our text. The Matthew 7, there we go. "Judge not, that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but not notice the log that is in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me first take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give the dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." So, what on earth is going on here? You read that, you're like, okay, not allowed to judge. Judge bad. Jesus say no judging. And all of us have heard this phrase, right? Don't judge me. Usually followed by the phrase, God knows my heart. And that's the ultimate trump card, right? If somebody brings that out in conversation, all bets are off, right? You're done, Frans, keep quiet. You can't do anything. God knows my heart and you know nothing. But I remember somebody saying that to me once, and I remember standing there and thinking, I was like, you know what? You're right, he does know your heart. And if that doesn't scare the daylights out of you, I don't know what will. Because that is the reality, is that God knows every intention, everything that you would rather want to keep hidden down in the deepest part of your soul. God sees all of it. And he's not fooled by the actions that you stick onto the outside of your life to convince him otherwise. Because why would somebody be afraid of judging, right? The only reason why somebody would tell me not to judge them is because there's probably something I should be judging them for. If they were living a life of integrity, they would have nothing to hide. Look at my life. I say I'm a Christian, I live as a Christian. Judge all you like. But most of us say we're Christians and live like the devil and then get angry when people point it out. So again, back to the text. What is going on here? Because the reality is that all of us judge all the time. The problem is that we have a distinctly negative view of judgment. Right? Judgment's always bad. Jesus says bad, therefore bad always. But judgment isn't only a negative word. A judge in a law court needs to use sound judgment to choose either for the accused or the plaintiff. That judge needs to decide, weigh the evidence, and pronounce a judgment that is righteous towards the one who deserves it. That is good judgment. I made a judgment this morning by putting on this jacket rather than flip-flops. And I'm not yet convinced whether that was the right one. My wife is. But she's not here right now, so she doesn't know what I'm saying. When I don't allow my kids to play with fire because I have made a judgment that that is harmful to their flourishing, that is sound judgment. And it should be used and celebrated. So again, what on earth is going on? Because there it is, don't judge. Psst. There is one word within this text that is the key to understanding not only this passage, but the entire sermon. And it's there in verse 5. Hypocrisy. The primary thing that Jesus rails against in the entire sermon is not the Old Testament. In this case, it's not judging. It is hypocrisy. It is the fact that we live lives which deny what we proclaim. That is the classical example of hypocrisy. In Matthew's gospel, it's even worse. For Matthew, hypocrisy is not only you say one thing but do something else, it's you do all of the right things but you're dead inside to God. Because here's the reality is you can go tomorrow and do everything the sermon tells you to do and not be alive to God. Søren Kierkegaard writes the following. He says, the Bible is very easy to understand. But we Christians, we are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend we are unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute we understand, we are obliged to act accordingly. The Sermon on the Mount is not rocket science. I did almost all of my doctoral research, excluding my dissertation, in the Gospel of Matthew. Sermon on the Mount is not rocket science. Simple. You read, you do. But the reason why we have all of this theological argument this way and that way is because as long as I say to myself and to other people, you know what, we don't actually know what this means. It could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. Obedience is suspended ad infinitum. And nobody actually has to do what it says. Hypocrisy. David Zoll, in his book, Seculosity, notes that people are suffering and dying of the torture of the fantasy self that they're failing to become. We all have false selves that we are building. False selves that we're building up, trying to construct some form of an identity to show to people around us. Christians are not immune to this. A church like Big House is not immune to that propensity. You can come to Big House and do everything that Big House says is good. Come and sing and dance and bow down and get a flag and pray. Those are all good things. But you can do those things every Sunday and not be alive to God. And here's the problem is nobody would know. Because all everybody is going to say is they're going to say, oh no, but look, Frans is here, he's here every Sunday. Look, he's serving with God. Look, he's doing this. He's doing all of the right things. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, I'm dead to God. Because unless this person has an intimate knowledge of who I am and has been praying for me, he's going to be unaware of the fact that, yes, I'm doing all of these things, but you know what? God actually asked me to do this and I didn't. And so we construct these false selves. And we look good and we feel good. And so it's not about saying that you're a Christian and cheating on your taxes. That's low-hanging fruit. That's the easy side. That's not what hypocrisy is getting at in Matthew. Obviously, everybody knows. Can't do that. Well, maybe everybody doesn't know. I don't know. What do I know? But the problem is that we are living in a way that is dependent on the responses of our environment. And the problem is when you're in a highly stimulating environment like this, is that you can live in a way which is dependent on the responses of the people who sit here week in, week out. And you can sing and raise your hands and do all these things, but the reality is that you are dead to God. Because the question is not, are you doing the right things? The question is are you alive to God? And all of these compulsions, we try to bolster this false self that we've created, so we end up doing all of the right things that everybody tells us we should be doing, but in reality, we're not alive to God. And here's the kicker. Is you know what happens then? Is we start judging people. We start saying, oh, well, wow, why can't that guy have a nice car, but I have to give all my money away? Oh, wow, why can that guy sue that guy who did him in, but I'm not allowed to sue anybody? Why can that guy slander people on Facebook, but I'm not allowed to do it? And so we start rationalizing because we don't actually believe that the way of Jesus is going to lead to life. So we're upset by the fact that somebody is getting ahead in life by not obeying the way of Jesus, because in reality, we really want to be just like him. But our social compulsions are restraining us. That does not lead to life. And so we start rationalizing, we're asking questions. Well, how close to the line can I come? Anybody ever here dated before? You know, in the dating life, everybody's like, well, kind of, what are we allowed and not allowed to do? Everybody's like, and just kind of move the line and, But in reality, you should be way over here and having none of that. And it's because right down, deep down within our souls, we believe that God is holding out on us.
Right.
That's the good life on the other side of the line. That's what I believe, and that's why I'm doing this. Because if I believed that the way of life is over here, guess where I'd be? That is the most dangerous form of hypocrisy. Is where you do all of the right things, but on the inside you are dead to the reality that the way and the words of Jesus are the ones which lead to life. There is a life on the other side of forgiving someone who stole from you and not demanding anything. Life. The world's telling you, no, sue him. Because money's life. You're saying, no, money's not life. If somebody curses you, slanders you, you do not respond in kind. You're like, you know what? Bless you, brother. Can I help you? Can I carry your bag? Life. And so we become burnt out, right? Become tired. Burnout's the hip word now. Everybody's burnt out. Left, right, and center. But Henry Nouwen says that burnout is just a convenient psychological term for spiritual death. And the reason you feel burnt out is because you have not embraced the way of Jesus. You've cut yourself off from the vine. Yes. And now you're dead. Because we want Jesus and the life that he promises, but we don't want to do what he's telling us to do. Admittedly, which is very difficult. It can cost you a lot to love somebody who curses you. It's difficult. But guess what? Welcome to the club. This is not the easy road. This is the road that goes to life. That's why we're on it, because we want life, not because we want easy things. So do we really hunger and thirst for the life that God is offering us? Or are we simply just content to be like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church, it's so wonderful, I read my Bible, I tithe, and don't worry about me, Pastor, I'm good. But in reality, you're dead. Why does all of this matter? I'm almost done. Don't know if there's a time limit for the second one. But here we are. Why does all of this matter? France is all about hypocrisy and don't have hypocrisy because it's bad, no life there. But why does it matter? It matters because integral to the mission of God in this world is that the people who are called by his name are called to be icons. Icon is a Greek term. An icon is not a picture. It is a mirror through which you look at something beyond it. I have been called, I embrace the way of Jesus because it is in the nature of my God to act the way I do for one purpose only, and that is to be a window so that when TJ looks at me, he sees the face of God. The problem is people are doing a whole lot of looking, but they're not seeing God. They're seeing all of the other stuff that we're holding on to. Ben Sixsmith writes in the New York Times, this is not in the slides, hope. He's an atheist writer. He writes that the article is called The Sad Irony of Celebrity Pastors. And he writes and he says, you know what? I'm not a Christian. So I'm not going to tell Christians what to do. But from my point of view, if you really have something worth believing, I would think that I would feel uncomfortable if I were around you. You'd make me feel uncomfortable because why is this guy living in this weird way? Wow, and that's why he believes it. He says, but the reality is, instead of you wanting to make me become more like you, it looks like you want to be more like me. And so our witness, the witness of the church, the witness of the image of God in this world is contingent upon us being the windows through which people can see the face of God. That's what's at stake. In fact, the word witness in Greek is a Greek word called martyreo. It's where we get the English word martyr from. Martyreo, I bear witness. And when Peter writes and he says, and we have been called to follow in his footsteps. Guess where Jesus' feet went? Jesus being convinced that the only way to life for us, he already had life, was that he embraced suffering and death. That's what's at stake. And so I'm going to remind you about what I started with. Is the goal of all of this is not so that everyone can be like, wow, Frans is really clever. The goal is worship. So we've got some time. You've got nowhere to be. We have at least 10 minutes. Don't think about your kids. Don't think about anything else. Just close your eyes. We are right now, in this moment, we are going to respond to what God is doing in our lives. I do not have what you need. Only Jesus can give you what you really need. I can only point you in the direction. So right now, there are 3 groups of people in here, and the prayer team can come forward. The first group of people, you've never given your life to Jesus. Lived life on your own terms. Like, I don't need that. But right now, you're feeling that tugging in your soul. You're feeling it. And if that's you, I want you to come down here to TJ. Today's the day. Second group of people, you've given your life to the Lord, but you're kind of just doing your own thing. Jesus is nice accessory. He's nice to have when things are down. But things are up right now. It's time to turn back to the Father. And then third group of people, and I would imagine this is all of us, including me, is right now where you sit is the Spirit of God is pointing out hypocrisy in your own soul. No one is immune to this. And we're just going to spend the next 9 minutes and we're just going to engage with the presence of God about this. I'm a big believer in letting your body put action to what your spirit is experiencing. So I'm going to challenge you. If God is speaking to you right now, I want you to stand up. I want you to stand up. I want you to say, yes, God. Yes, God. And some of you need to come down here and you need to pray. You need to engage with God right here at the altar. You need to say, yes, God. You need to say no to fear of man or whatever everybody around you is going to think. That doesn't matter. Right now, what matters is what God is doing in your heart, because that's the way to life. I want to challenge you to say yes to God. And we're just going to wait here. I want every person, just engage. Close your eyes. Don't look around. Just press in. Just press in.